Hello, friends. We have returned to me a sequel to the narration and review of the first episode of the Far Land series titled Bemo, which we narrated about half of that episode, and we stopped at Bemo's entry into the jungle capsule to bring me the Genesis crystal. From here, we will continue our story. But after the intro, my friends. We saw that Bemo alone entered the jungle capsule for me, and that Mr. M did not enter with him, and he gave him a transmitter and a map so that he would not get lost inside that forest, and we see that Bemo began to feel fear. But he continued to search for the crystal, and after him the creatures in the forest began to attack Bemo, but he ran away and fell into a hole full of flying crabs. And we saw that that hole began to secrete a burning acid, and those crabs started to fly out of the hole, and Bemo took advantage of that and jumped on. One of the crabs came out of the hole with him, and then the scene moves us to Y4 and Olive, who enter Mr. M's room to retrieve my Y4 gravity boot, and I forgot to tell you that Mr. M bet Y4 on the shoe and lost it. And when I entered that room, he found another USB like the one Bemo got in the previous episode, so Y4 downloaded the USB information to Olive, so I was surprised. We will know what it is later. And the scene brings us back to Mr. M, who tells Bemo from the transmitter that he has already reached me the crystal. The scene takes us back to Y4, which turns out to be the cause of the frequent breakdowns at the drifting station. I learned that Hugo and Mr. M are using Bemo to bring the crystal. Indeed, Bemo has obtained the crystal, and we see that the forest began to die after Bemo removed the crystal from its place. And we knew that the reason for the collapse of the drift station was that Hugo was taking the necessary pieces of capsules and disabling them in order to complete the production of the Unity capsule. We see that Bemo is running towards the door, and Mr. M and those creatures in the woods are catching up with him. And when Bemo approached the door, he threw the Genesis crystal to Mr. M, and then he jumped towards the door. But Mr. M closed the door on him, and his hand stuck under the door, and after him, Mr. M left Bemo in the forest. And those creatures came after him and pulled Bemo, and his hand was still stuck, which led to Bemo being shattered and disintegrating into small parts. And then the scene moves us to Bemo's awareness and says, Bemo.
I think I'm dying.
There is a conversation between him and his consciousness consisting of 6 personalities, and after him we see that there is a small piece of Lee Bemo still moving. And then the scene moves us to Y4 and Olive, whose mother tells that the one who spoils the drift is Hugo himself. But he got angry and took the USB from him and gave it to Mr. M, who we saw had eaten it. After that, I told them that I had loaded the information on the USB onto Olive, so Mr. M turned me off and took Olive with him. We see that Y4 disobeyed his mother and decided to go to rescue Bemo from the jungle capsule. And then we see that Y4 used Ricky to deliver it to me in the jungle capsule. And upon her arrival, I found that those 2 insects who gave Bemo USP in the past are turning to stealing Bemo's parts for me to sell them. And then they remembered that Bemo had rescued them earlier, and they decided to help Y4. And they returned to the scrap capsule that we talked about in the previous episode, in which the robot that looks like Bemo is located Sego. So I asked him, Y4, to fix Bemo for me, and then Sego said that he knew Bemo, and he said that I was practically his cousin. And then Y4 said that when they fix Bemo, they can stop Hugo. And then we knew that Hugo was made by Sego when they were on Earth. And we know that Hugo is human, and that he fled from the planet Earth before the start of the Mushroom War. And we see that Hugo has transformed himself into an alien bee in some way. And we see that Hugo, when he was wandering in space, Olive B brought him to the drift station, as he did with Bemo at the beginning of the episode. And after that, Hugo B began to open his shops and manufacture literally everything. And we saw in the episode that Hugo's name is everywhere in products and markets, and then he got rid of Sego and spoiled the station, and that Olive returned to space again. Then we see that Seju led the restoration of Bemo parts, and that he tried to operate it, but to no avail. After that, the scene takes us back to Hugo, who is riding the Genesis crystal in the Unity capsule, and that it has worked, which led to the station losing control and catching fire, and the scene returns us to Y4, which is still trying to wake up Bemo, and we see that at that sad moment, Bemo came back to life. The scene takes us to Hugo, who has already filled the Unity capsule, and the drift station begins to collapse, and Bimo and Y4 enter them. And we see that Y4 started to address the people of the drift station that Hugo is behind everything, but he has no evidence to prove it. So we see that Bimo still keeps the information from the USB that he carried in his memory in the past, and he presented it to the people of the drift station. And everyone was surprised at what Hugo was planning from the beginning, and he told them that the idea of making a Unity capsule came to me to save himself and his team. And then he destroyed the driving unit at the drift station and entered the Unity capsule, and Mr. M followed him through a jetpack. And they were no longer able to stop it. So Bimo came up with the idea of separating the capsule from the station to stop the fuel from reaching it before its launch. And then we see that the people of the drift station have gathered to extract the Unity capsule and throw it into space before it can charge its energy. We see that Mr. M has fallen from the Unity capsule and started swimming in space. We see that the people of the drift station rejoiced at me foiling Hugo's plan. But the drift station is still broken. And then we see that the two thieving bugs have a lot of pieces in the scrap capsule, and that the drift people have stepped up to repair the station. We see that Y4 has earned the respect of her parents. And then we see that Bimo has ridden on Ricky and decided to return to planet Earth, and the scene takes us back to Hugo, and that Olive is still with him. And then we see that Bimo has actually arrived on the planet Earth, and that he has entered the Earth's gravitational field and went down specifically to the treehouse next to Finn and Jake. And the shock that shocked everyone is that this is the first time that Bimo sees Finn and Jake when they are young.
Who's that?
Here we have come to the end of the narration and review of an episode of the Distant Lands series from the Adventure Time cartoon. And we will talk in the next episode about the most important secrets in this episode. But before I bid you farewell, my friends, I want to remind you not to forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell button, and interact on the videos in the channel. And you are well, friends. Your brother Cardamon was with you, and we will meet in the next episode.